All right. We are actually streaming live on time
Right?
this month.
In beautiful snowy New York, which
It
you
is-
can't see. A green screen isn't working, unfortunately.
It is. It's snowing in New York. Terrible weather always keeps people away. So it's me and Clay in New York here today, and some of our other regulars are out traveling a bit. We do have a guest this month, and to be, you know, watchful of his time and respectful of his time, we're just going to jump right into it. So this month we have Tim Perfect with us, who always does interesting work. Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before you dive into the interesting stuff you're doing this month?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Tim Perfect. I founder of Two Canoe Software. We started in 2012, and I was at Apple for about a decade before that, and working on anywhere from the certification training for Mac OS 10, back when it was called that, up through field engineering, and then did some work with engineering at Apple to help with things that people care less about now, but they still care about a little bit: Active Directory and directory services and those kind of things. Since leaving Apple in 2012, our flagship product is WinClone that allows you to deploy boot camp partitions to dual boot Macs, as well as other utilities around there. And also nice having my own company where I can develop software. My interest has led me to interesting places. We have utilities for like smart cards and for testing your push notification server and all sorts of other things. But my latest project is Mac Deploy Stick, or MDS. So that's what I'm here to talk about, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really curious what the genesis of this was. Like, what led you to create this?
So yeah, it's about a year in the making or more. So I did about a year ago, a little bit more a year ago, the iMac Pro was released, and it had the new secure boot, and of course our flagship product being WinClone and dual booting. That has really, it's not about cloning, it's about booting it, and getting secure boot to boot Windows was obviously a very large concern and interest to me. So I got one of the first, I ordered it on the first day and got it delivered, and I kind of tore apart, and I dug into the OS and secure boot right around the new year, year before last, and kind of figured out what I needed to know about secure boot. So I kind of got understanding about how things were changing. And I think I appreciated how large of a change it was, but I didn't really understand how large of an impact it was going to have on admins. I know, even though everyone was yelling imaging is dead and all this kind of stuff, but I think that the amount of changes to the way that we deploy Macs is bigger than like the Intel transition, right? All of our processes and the way we do things had to change to do it. And Apple was providing the tools, but not all of them, especially ones that were homegrown and those kind of stuff. So we lost NetBoot, we lost target disk mode. We still had dual boot, but it was in a secure mode. We lost the ability to programmatically select the startup disk, right? And that's was a big deal too. So all these little things really affected. And then going forward, I went to the Penn State Mac Admins Conference, and I think that's in June. And I met up. One of the sessions was about creating Windows images, but with Rob Roy, and he talked about how he used an Arduino to kind of automate the keystrokes. And ever since people talked about putting a nickel on the N key and doing stuff like that, I've been kind of interested in this. I did some embedded programming and did some other things with beacons, and I'm like, you can do it with an embedded device, but like the audience is not, I mean, it's not millions of people that want one of these, right? It's hundreds or thousands kind of thing. But Rob Roy's like, no, you can do it with an Arduino. He's like, I did it. I put it up on my blog. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. So I wrote up a blog post on how to completely automate it as kind of a, I don't know, it wasn't tongue in cheek. It was more just a technical challenge, right? Can you do this completely not automated? And the reaction was kind of funny. It was on Twitter, it was more like, wow, this is technically interesting. And oh my God, are we really at this place where we're having to spoof a keyboard to do keyboard strokes to get around the security? And then other people were like, Apple's just going to close this up kind of thing. So it's like, I just laughed. It's like, oh, it's an interesting project. I'll move on to other things and do that. And so Fast forward to kind of the end of this year, and I found out people started to do recovery partition restoring. And Greg Nagel, as well as some other folks, put some stuff together to be able to restore the Mac OS. Oh, I forgot to mention the whole like firmware updates have to go with the OS, right? That's another huge change that happened.
That's the key to all of it, really,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the reason you can't do target disk mode installs and all these things. It's really about getting the firmware right.
Yeah, and Apple kind of forcing it, and so these novel changes, and then of course the answer, and the reason I didn't investigate it further was like, well, there's DEP and there's MDM, right? So we got the three-letter acronyms with full coverage, right? So you just get a machine registered with Apple, you start it up, it automatically sets itself up, registers an MDM, you're done, right? It's awesome. No need for other solutions.
Works perfectly every time.
What's that?
Works perfectly every time.
Right. And my concerns were always like, well, what happens if it goes down? Well, it used to go down, but now it doesn't, and that kind of stuff. But I'm like, okay, well, why do you always have to register your machines with Apple? Well, that doesn't matter. It's a free service. So I'm like, okay. But the bigger thing was, even if you do DEP, you got to touch it for a couple of screens. And not all your machines are in DEP. And it took me I'm not the target audience. And of course, I like to do things that are hard just to prove a point, as with my whole like getting MDS in the App Store. But aside from that, the getting enrolled in DEP took me 2 years. So I was working through the Apple store here. I had to get my DUNS number and an SAP number, and then you had to do a custom store, and they had to deliver to you. And it was very cumbersome to do. And I got my first machine, actually, I think it's like 6 months ago, was the first time I had one. I was able to re-enrolled in DEP. And so as soon as that happened, I got enrolled. I'm like, okay, here's the serial numbers, all the machines I want to roll in for the rest of them. Like, we don't have that many employees, but we have probably 10 machines we enrolled. We're like, no, we can't do that for old machines. And I'm like, okay, this seems like it would be a problem for people if they can't do the machines. And I also heard I do a lot of work in higher education, they buy through their campus bookstores, which aren't necessarily resellers, that are able to enroll things in DEP. And so we got a lot of answers back that were from Apple that were just like, that's something we're looking at, we're doing, but we're hitting lab season, right? Lab season starts in May and it's February. So people need to roll out these machines. There's a lot of Deploy Studio people that can't do NetBoot. They have to do the upgrade to Mojave. So I like, okay, let's have a holiday project and write Mac Deploy Stick. So that's what I did. I kind of productized all this stuff that I was doing, and I love the Arduino piece of it. It does the keyboard, because I mean, this goes back to like the hacker ethic of like, can you write it in less number of code? How many fewer lines of code can you have, right? How fast can this be to image a machine? And I know it's fun to do, but then people are like, are you going to sell this? And I'm like, no, I don't want to get in a hardware again. I'll just throw it out there and people can flash an Arduino themselves. It's cheaper. And people are like, oh, I can't find a case. If you sold it for $50, I'd buy it. I'm like, you're pushing money in my pocket. It must mean something. So I didn't do a Kickstarter. I did you just say that you're going to buy it. And if we get 100 people or 100 devices, I'll use my 3D printer to print the enclosures. So I learned how to use SketchUp poorly, but enough to be able to do an enclosure, and made an enclosure, got my 3D printer working. And we created a Slack channel for 3D printing users, which is kind of fun. And I don't know, it's just allowed to interact with the community. And so I did everything open source, right? All the code for MDS is up. People can modify if they want to. I also need to eat too. And people sometimes like support and to pay for it and to buy the hardware. So I put that all out there. And so the idea is like, I'm just going to throw it all out there and people can tell me what they want to do with it. And the reaction's been great. I mean, it's been, the Slack channel is very active and it fits a niche. And I think really what it is if people that want to go in and walk up to a machine and they don't care what the state is. They just want to get the rapid return to service. They want to get it back on the network and running. Is it in depth? I don't know. Is it part of MDM? I don't know. I'm just going to get this machine back and running. There's also ones where, like, if you have a machine that has data that's sensitive, you can't just clean it up. You have to wipe it, right? Because otherwise people don't feel good about it. And iOS has a great capability to do that, but macOS doesn't. And I'm still a little bit unclear as to, I think there's some MDM commands you can send to erase it to come back, but I don't think it's either, well, it's not well known enough or not completely foolproof enough for people to do kind of on a wide scale basis?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I know I've heard from people that use that. You can send the command, but you never really get any verification back to your management devices that says, yes, the wipe was successful. Like you send the command and maybe it worked. So that's, I believe, why a lot of people don't necessarily trust that method.
And then when it's done, it's wiped, and then it does the DEP, but you have to go touch it, right, to do the first couple of screens. Is that right or not? It's really vague to me.
Yeah,
Well, when you first, the setup assistant will prompt you to like, this is a company's machine
device. Yeah.
You know, do the management stuff or not. But after that, it's, you know, so there's at least one click of like, yes, this is something that's managed by this company, or I'm going to do it on my own.
Right. So you got to touch the machine, and so it's something you have to touch it later on too. So I don't know. It just felt like, you know, I did classroom setups for Apple back in like 2000, right? And the idea is that you like had to go in and set up 30 machines, and if you had to manually install it, it'd take a couple of days, right? But if you could block-based image it, you can do it in 45 minutes or less, right? And then NetBoot came about and all that kind of stuff gave some options. And I'm like, you need to be able to do this. There's got to be a solution to do it, to walk in and know that you can wipe the machine and just walk away. Because time not in front of the computer doesn't count, right? So if you can walk in, touch it once, and walk away and then get verification, I mean, that's the perfect system. And so that's what MDS kind of its goal is, right? You can walk up to a machine, plug in an external drive or have a resource on a web server, plug in an Arduino and hold the option key down, plug in the Arduino and walk away. And you know that in half an hour, it'll be in your MDM or, you know, at the login screen. So, and it's nice that way. And I leveraged, of course, a ton of the tools that the community had done. It's got Imager in it, and some of the work that Greg Nagel did, I don't think I used any of his code because it was just like a 1 or 2 bash line script, but it kind of proved the point what you could do. And I don't know, it's just a lot of the ideas encapsulated in it. And so it seems to be fitting a niche, and it's kind of neat. I don't know if it's a long-term tool, but at the same time, I think there's always going to be a need for, I'm not sure what this machine is. I just want to wipe it and move on and get it back in. So
yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I still have a lot of questions just out of my own interest. Yeah, it's interesting hearing the genesis of it, that you saw someone do this at the Penn State conference, because I guess it was about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Ed Eigerman did a talk at MacTech conference where he did something similar based on the
Rubber ducky.
No, the team.
Okay.
So it's a same sort of thing. It's just like this little, you know, embedded OS, and it's great for programming USB. And he did a workshop. We handed out a bunch of Teamsies to people, and he led people through creating something really similar, like let's make a switch, and it will either hold down T automatically or, you know, some other grab key on the Mac. So kind of similar, which was pretty cool. Had you had any experience with Arduino prior to this project?
No, but I had done a lot of, my last couple of years have been in the kind of the beacon space. So the embedded programming I was familiar with, and I didn't know, and we did a whole product based on Raspberry Pi, and I'd done a bunch of, you know, Unix is my background, so I felt more comfortable in that. And the guy that did this firmware for us for the beacons, you know, he checked code in and we would talk about it, but I never did any of that coding because it was RTOS and all these terms I didn't know.
Yeah.
And he was an expert at it. So, I mean, like that's like kernel programming, right? Firmware programming. But I didn't understand what Arduino was because it's an overloaded term, right? It means the hardware, the bootloader, the tools generally, right? It can also mean other hardware too. And there's Arduino compatible, which what the hell does that mean? And it's like, I couldn't get my head around it, but I now know that really what it comes down to is like, it's the bootloader and it's the whole ecosystem, right? That makes it really easy to do this embedded programming without having to worry about, like right here in my drawer, I have a it's like a $300 programmer, because that's the way you have to flash onto these embedded devices. And like, you can't expect a hobbyist to spend $300 just on a cable, right? And the tools, like the compiler we had to buy, was $3,000, right? So it's like, no. And so and that's just the bootloader. You got to flash on there too, and you got to buy that. But Arduino made it so you can just write a couple lines. I want to flash an LED. And you press the button and do it. And the funny thing is, like, when we flash our beacons, if you screw up, some of them are enclosed, so you have to throw them away, right? You screw up the bootloader, you're done. And it's just like your router too. You unplug it when in the middle of a firmware update, it's possible you'll brick it.
Yeah.
But with Arduino, the bootloader is not, unless you overwrite the bootloader, you can do anything you want to that, and it will always come back. We've never had it not come back. You can always get back to the bootloader. So it's pretty much foolproof that way. So it's, my experience with Arduino was new for once I understood what it was, but it was pretty comfortable once I got in there. And the other thing is, the language is it's pretty much C, but it's C-ish, and I felt very comfortable in that. And I love the fact that it's based on all these open source tools, so I can build them into my tools as well to flash them and stuff like that. It was just easy, right? It was just easy I could focus on the task instead of focusing on like the compiler or learning a new language or whatever. So
Yeah.
that was cool.
Yeah.
And so
I've only done some really basic stuff with Arduinos, making lights blink and connecting buttons to turn motors on and things. But yeah, it was always a pretty nice experience. But I think, kind of as you mentioned, I got taken away by the lure of the Raspberry Pis, because now you have a full, Linux system at your disposal, and like, oh, I know this. This is really familiar. And
a full system the size of a deck of cards is more powerful than most systems you've owned in your life.
Yeah, the Raspberry Pis are great.
But the one thing is battery life, right? And the funny thing is, and also emulating. So that's why it's fun. It's like Arduino. So you look at the board, and it's like it's an ARM processor, and then maybe one or two other components. And you know what? You look what the components are, and they're like for the USB connector. There's like nothing on them, right? It's literally talking directly to the processor, and so it's really just the bootloader they made and all the tools around it. So you're talking like, to be able to emulate a USB device. I mean, that's what a USB device is. Like, you break it apart, it's going to have an ARM processor and a USB chip, or maybe it's going to be built into the ARM processor. So Raspberry Pi, if you want to do something that's low power, it's harder to do that. And the boot up time on the Arduino, so it's like almost zero, right? It's immediately available. So it's like it's not, before I think like, do you want to do Raspberry Pi or do you want to do Arduino? And there's crossover, but it really comes down to like battery usage and like, do you want to do stuff that's like rate metal, right? Like, you want to be a device.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on your case, which is, that's sort of the dividing line. So yeah, I think you touched on this, but I was, you mentioned that, Two Canoes, pretty much your company, and it's such an interesting product because you had the insight into what it's like to run a lab and image a lab, because most, individuals aren't concerned with setting up multiple machines or worried about a lab or a fleet of machines or anything along that scale. So it's an interesting product to come from you, right? I think, like, as an individual, like, yeah, here's this tool that's going to let you image X number of machines.
Right. And also I went out to visit a couple of schools this summer when we were working on this summer? It was last summer, almost a year ago, but we were working on the WinClone 7 ability to do like the WinPE environments to tie into the Microsoft infrastructure. And a lot of those folks use Deploy Studio. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do when you can't net boot? And they're like, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me about that. That is too scary. And I talked to another admin, and then I get on the Slack and everybody be like, oh, it's all MDM and DEP. We're all good. And I'm like, there's a whole contingency. And then that's higher ed, right? And then I talked to some K-12 folks, and they don't have the budget to spend. They buy the Apple hardware, and to buy a new management tool and a cost per device to them is a difficult sell and a long-term type thing. So I'm like, there's this gap, and these people are going to suffer for it. And I think it'd be interesting to solve something, that problem in between. I really thought it would be a solution that was really just be good for this summer, that everybody would be over onto DEP and MDM going forward. But I don't know, things evolve in interesting ways. So we'll see. I mean, it really goes down to the core of like, what is Monkey for? What is micro MDM for? What is, Deploy Studio for? It's just like these tools have a need because of the organizations that they're in. And so even like, last summer I did a 5,000 Mac deployment. I helped a reseller create the scripts and stuff to do dual boot for 5,000 MacBook Airs that go to teachers. And that was I knew when I worked at Apple that there's these mass rollouts that happen, but to see it like in a huge warehouse with tables and they get in the computers and they unbox them and they charge, they count how much time it takes to unbox it, how many they can put in, how much bench space you have, and the amount of time to do it. And it's 5,000 is a high number, and that's not even a really high number. It's a good big number, but it's not 10,000 or 100,000. And just having 3 or 4 labs is difficult too. So there's these areas where I think it's going to be like to have, if you think about your unboxing machine and setting up to send to somebody, you won't be able to do given like DEP, but you will be able to send it directly out to them. But that's not a situation that you'll always be in, right? You can't, sometimes you have to set it up beforehand. So I don't know. It's to me, it can be maybe not everyone fits cleanly into these buckets, I guess.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think that goes for a lot of products, not just the Mac, but even software products. Developers or product teams hear back from companies, and they're using their product in a way that the developer either never envisioned in the first place. Like, oh, really? That's what you're doing? Or it was a use case that the developer just said, no one will ever do that, or they need to make a change. Whereas the friendlier approach is the product talks to the end user, finds out the requirements, and sort of builds the solution around that. But we know that's
one of the people are talking about using MicroPlayStick is they have 300 continuous integration servers at a remote site. And sometimes they go wrong and they need to rebuild them. Instead of driving there, they want to use MicroPlayStick to reboot in, re-image it, or re-employ it, and then come back to do that. It's like it's almost like a remote KVM kind of thing without any of the KVM features. Like it does it, the automaton does it for you. So it's interesting where it goes, right? Because I never even imagined it would go to that. And it made you think about like, could you actually remote control your mouse? Like I move a mouse and it sends a Bluetooth command to the device that sends it to the Mac kind of thing. So you can remotely control it, which is crazy, but it also makes you think like, once you're at that hardware level, you can do this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's also made me think of what's the thing at Google, the Santa, is that right? The kernel extension to do it. I guess I don't know exactly what it does, but I do know that there's a lot of people spend a lot of time getting it to work, and then when the ability that you had to approve the kernel extension, it kind of swooped in and kind of blocked that. And it's like you're, as people describe, you're running around at Apple's the elephant, and you're the mouse running around trying not to get stomped on, kind of thing. Sometimes,
yeah, sometimes. So one, I think, last question from my side. You said you've open sourced all of this work, the hardware designs, I presume, as well.
Hardware's Arduino, so it's already open source. So I link off to a couple of them.
Okay.
It's not my design.
So,
but I do provide the firmware as well.
Right. Okay.
Source.
Have you had any feedback on the open source release, or do you have any indication that people are actually using it? Like, would a school say like, we're just going to do this on our own and start putting things together themselves from the open source plans that you've put out? Or do you think, well, it's nice, I've put it out, but I don't know if anyone's actually using it?
I'm pretty sure no one's using it, because when I've been pushing it up, I include like we use Paddle it's a NAG system where people want to do payments, and as well as the promotion. We have promotional other products put in, and that stuff really wouldn't work if it was compiled externally. It would still work. You comment those lines out, but I haven't cleaned it up yet. So if anybody would download the source, they get a few errors, but it's be really easy to clean up. So I'm pretty sure I'd get feedback like, you need to comment this stuff out, but I haven't got any of that feedback. But I do feel like I'm offering this as like, this is something that I want the community to use, the source is out there and say, so I can't change my mind, right? I'm burning the ships kind of thing, right? I could make it closed source, but I have to start at this point where I'm talking with you right now, right? Where you could go on from that point on. So it gives a little bit of security when folks be able to do it. And I know I don't know, it feels like I have more credibility when I say like, you can continue to use this product for free. You can pay for support. That says, well, if I say you don't get to use it for free, you can still use it for free because the source is there. You just either needed a buddy that knows how to pull from Git or have some programming chops to do it. So I don't know. I found that the community is more active on Slack for giving feature requests and testing. And that to me is more the exciting part of it. And also, like, if I want to include parts like Imager, right? I don't know how many people contributed to Imager, but I downloaded the source and I modified it to something, and I'm going to push the stuff back up. So I think that you can have projects that are old or I don't want to say old. It's been around for a while that can be reused and incorporated into other things and still have life to them. So I think it's more of an insurance policy than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I do understand the value in having something that, you know, you can just plunk down some money for and you get a thing and it just works versus building it all yourself. I get it. So I think more people appreciate that.
Yeah.
That, you know,
it's not always about, you know, it's not, the time and the effort is sometimes worth just here's some money to do it for you. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. I know there's in aviation, there's this ADS-B receiver thing you can build with a Raspberry Pi and some antennas, and you buy some chips, and you can buy all the bits off, you know, and put it together yourself. Or there's several companies that'll take all the parts and put it together and ship it to you, you know, all built for an extra probably 30% on top of the cost. But you know, so it's exactly that sort of system. I think it works well. Here's this open source tool, and here's another, you know, you in this case that's building this thing and shipping it all said and done, and saving everyone the time and the effort to like find out all the pieces and put them all together.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people, it's like, well, I could just get it for free. I don't have to pay for it. I'm like, well, if you don't pay for it, I'm not going to work on it for very much longer. So it's really up to you if you want to do it. If you want to take it over, you can, but you probably want me working on it, so pay a little bit of money. And to be honest with you, I've gotten only really, people are a little bit not offended, taken aback by you're just giving away for free. I'm like, no, I sell it too. So if you show it to purchasing, it looks like a product, but you're really buying support. There's no, even when I talked to the lawyer about the software license agreement, he's like, well, tell me again. So you're saying it's this price per machine, but there's not a per machine license. And so we went around and around. It came down to what I want to do is provide support. And I tell people like how many licenses do I need? And I'm like, well, you don't need any licenses, but if you want support on them, what I recommend is you add up the number of machines you think you'll be using this on, round up a little bit, throw on some money for goodwill, and then that's the amount you should pay. Yeah. Most people's reaction are like, that seems fair. So it's an experiment. We'll see what happens. So
yeah, well, I mean, I presume also the larger the company, the more that they should be buying, so they can do this increasingly parallelized, right?
Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, so there's some interesting ideas where if you roll in, because you can host MDS disk image on a web server, right? And then if you have a web server, you could have your Monkey instance on that as well. And then I've also incorporated some, making a package with auto PKG. And then there's some ideas like, can't you have it run the recipes while it's deploying? And then you have the most up-to-date one. So there's like all these ideas. So it's like this fertile ground that's really, for me, really interesting to work on. So part of it is just the beginnings of this project. Any project is kind of really interesting because you have all the ideas floating around. And some people, I love when people is like, I didn't know what I was going to do this summer, but you saved me. I think it's good.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Like the people probably most impacted by this are schools with labs and, you know, K through 12 and university level. So, I think this really probably did save a bunch of people.
And these are, and you know, remembering way back in my lab support days, people that were completely overwhelmed to begin with. So having a tool that'll help them through, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I also offer them like we can come in and do it, or we can help build the image for you. And I always expect like, oh, professional services, they're just trying to get money from us. But they're like, really? I could do that. I'm going to go talk to my boss, right? Because and I get this every year. It's like, I've never used a Mac before, and I got to get this lab working in 2 weeks. And I don't know what to do. And I'm like, will your tool help us? And this was about WinClone, but it could be about MDS. And the answer is yes, but to come up in 2 weeks to go from knowing nothing about the Mac to full deployment is going to be hard. And you're going to have a lot of late nights, or just pay me to do it, right? Yeah. And we can get people to do it. And the reaction I always thought was like, oh, Tim's trying to get money out of me. But almost always the reaction is, thank you, right? It's like, you're helping me out. So it's been cool. And the other thing too is I learn a lot when I go on site or I help develop these images. They're always doing something crazy that you learn from, right? That you didn't expect them to have this requirement. So like I had this great Twitter conversation with Armin about packages, because WinClone packages are an MP as the bundle type packages. And he's like, well, nobody really uses those anymore. And then Greg Nagel chimed in. It's like, well, except for Adobe, and Armin's like, oh, well, I was going to ignore that. Well, then I found out there's this antivirus software that uses MPKG that has bundled packages inside of it. So I thought I was the only one out there still using it, and I was using it for a good reason, right? I wasn't doing it because I wasn't updating my stuff, but the bundle type package is kind of required for WinClone. Otherwise, you have to double copy things. Mm-hmm. But it turns out there's a lot of them out there, and so you can convert them. I've learned more about packages in the last 3 weeks than I told myself someday I got to sit down and learn it, and I finally did. And it's not clean. It's organic.
Yeah, has a long history.
It does, and you can kind of see it right from when it goes from bundles to MPKG and App Store, and it's almost like the history through the lens of packaging.
Yeah. Well, I guess the actual bundle PKG format goes back to Next.
Does it? Oh yeah, I guess it would. Well, apps for bundles in the next days. I'm sure it does.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fascinating. Anything else you want to leave us with, Tim? Besides, go buy MDS.
More important than that, join the Slack channel, and I put a bunch of videos up on YouTube. I'm trying to focus on documentation and getting as much feedback as possible. And if anybody wants to contribute to the project, if I get a pull request, I'll fall out of my chair. So I'd love to have. Of course, it is Objective-C, so somebody would have to do Objective-C to do that. But we'll see. There's got to be some people out there to be interested in. But more, it's not so much the programming; it's more just the feedback and trying it.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck with it. I hope this is just sort of the early adopters helping you figure it out and spreading the word for you.
I think it's crazy, right? The idea that we're imaging or installing from the recovery partition. But to be honest, the more I do it, the more it feels a little bit like what you do with Windows when you boot from WinPE and you do the selector. And so in a year, is it going to be, it might be completely like, no, Apple's blocked it, you can't do it, or Apple has a utility that you can run in recovery that allows you to do it, right? I wouldn't be surprised in either direction. So we'll see what happens.
I remember my compact Presario in 1994 had a system partition that let you recover. And it just always annoyed me because back in the day, right, hard drives were much smaller. And I'm like, why is it taking up all this space?
Yeah, but exactly.
Everything old is new again, right?
Yeah, well, it's about efficiencies and be able to do it. And I've been doing time trials, right, to find out how fast that I can do it. And it's been fun. I got it down to, you can do it under 20 minutes, but you can parallelize it. You can do it like 3 minutes per machine. You have to let it run for 3 minutes so you can move them over. And so we went through, did a conference in Idaho a week ago. And we set up 20 machines in like 10 minutes, and then they ran for like 45 minutes. Because I think the SSDs are slower. I never thought I'd say that, but they had slow SSDs. But it didn't matter because I had 3 hours to set them up. So I spent 5 minutes plugging or 10 minutes plugging stuff in, and I just chilled for 45 minutes and they all came up. So I know it works.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Will we see you at any conferences coming up anytime soon?
Penn State is usually the one that I go to. I don't think the Jamf one I haven't been to in a couple of years. Any recommendations?
Well, we always talk about conferences this month, and I think you're right. I think Penn State is always a good one. I think of all the Mac conferences out there, that's kind of become one of the largest, and it's for me, it's nice to have that on the East Coast, sort of like an East Coast gathering of people. But I think they've been hitting around 600-ish people each year, attendees, and I think that's the largest of all of them. Like, people travel from all over. I see in the comments, Zach recommended Mac DevOps in Vancouver. That's always a good conference. Go talk to Matt X. I think he would appreciate your presence. It's a good conference. That's sort of on the other end of the scale. That's one of the smaller ones, but it gives it a really unique vibe that you can genuinely kind of get around and see everyone at that conference and speak with them, and it's a very intimate setting. Xworld, which is the one I forgot last month, Xworld just announced their dates. That's in Sydney, Australia. I think it was June 26th through 29th. Of course, there is Mac Sysadmin, and of course, I do want to pause on Mac Sysadmin for a moment. Tico Sojin, the founder of Mac Sysadmin, sort of lost his battle with cancer. Passed away late January 22nd. There was a memorial for him in his hometown in Sweden just this past weekend. But the conference lives on. I'm not sure how emotional it'll be for some people this year, but I will definitely be there, and that's another great event. Single track, usually about 250 people there from all over Europe. And what's really nice about that is it gives you a whole new crowd, right? Like, I think all the conferences we mentioned, Mac DevOps and even Mac Tech and Penn State, all the ones in the US and Canada, we tend to see a lot of the same people. There's a sort of a large crossover of people in both attendees and speakers. But I haven't been to Macaduck. I presume that's also similar. That's coming up March.
That's coming. I'll be out there in London for Macaduck at the end of March.
Speaking?
Just before Brexit. No, just attending this time.
Okay.
Also, the Mac Deploy conference, which is just before Canada. Mac DevOps in Calgary. They would probably be interested in that.
Yeah, I've been talking about that one as well. I've been meaning to go to Sweden. I've actually talked. It's one of my big regrets is I didn't realize that how far along the cancer was with Tico, and I thought that I'd been talking to him the last couple of years, and I was actually supposed to go, but I had a family thing that conflicted, and I had no idea that. It's just so sad. So, and he did a transition, like, oh, I'm stepping back from the conference, and did like introduction, and like 2 months later, I heard the news. I'm just like, wow, he was doing it up to the very end. It's like he's a hero in my book.
Yeah. Really, really was, and he was really active with this climate change group in Sweden, and even that. He was out in his electric wheelchair, sort of like right up until the end, and so yeah, he's a good guy. So his spirit will definitely live on through that.
Yeah.
And the person he passed it on to, Patrick, has been his partner in putting that conference on for years. So Patrick is well versed in how to run everything, and I've been speaking with him about resources and helping out however I can. So there you go. There's a brain dump of conferences.
There you go. We'll see. I mean, what do you guys think of? I mean, what do you think about restoring Macs from the recovery partition? Is it on the scale of sane to crazy? Where does it fall?
I think it's pretty sane because Apple does a fairly good job of ensuring that the recovery partition is valid, and the whole chunk lists disk image thing they boot from is verified, and so we feel pretty confident about that.
Yeah, it does seem like it's in the rails, though. I did hear some feedback that there's no reason it shouldn't work, but it's not really expected to do it that way, kind of thing. But I think that's how disk utility, what is the ASR came about, right? It was a manufacturing tool that Apple never thought that customers would want, but they were like clamoring at the gates. We need this. So it could very well be something like that. But
I think Apple, there are a lot of things like that in the Apple world that it's like, well, this will work. No reason it shouldn't. but we don't guarantee that it will.
Yeah, and I think we need we the admin and the community that manages Macs need to make sure we say that we're using this because this is the only valid solution that is possible. All of the other tools that you say we could have used no longer valid for whatever reason. So we need to make sure we let Apple know.
Right. And part of the reason I did come out, one thing I did mention is that I know that some customers have been in discussions with Apple that there's ways that similar ways that they've been doing it that Apple is not recommended, but told that they could. Right. So I think if they block that off, it would cause much kind of hand wringing with Apple customers from what discussions Apple had with them. So it's becoming more of a known thing, and whether or not it's I don't think it's like imaging where Apple is actively trying to kill it off. It's more like they're trying to get people on depth. But there's acknowledgement there's other things that need to be done as well.
Yeah.
Yep. So, well, good. Yeah, this was fun. I appreciate it. Maybe one of these days I'll come on and sit at the table across from you for reals.
Yeah, we'd love that. And hopefully we see you at one of these events, if not Penn State, one of the other ones real soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. And I think
Bye now.
Wrap up this month and see everyone in March. Thanks.
All right. Bye now.